This video is brought to you by True Tales of Buried Treasure, the largest collection of old treasure magazines in the West. On our website, you can search for individual treasure stories by region, or buy our original magazines themselves. To pay us a visit, please click on the link in the description. Enjoy. When Lee, a full-blooded Cherokee, arrived in what is now eastern Oklahoma in 1827, he never imagined that the crystal-clear stream that would one day bear his name, Lee's Creek, already held the promise of untold riches. Beneath its waters lay 7 jackloads of Spanish gold, hidden long before his arrival. At the time, this region was part of the vast Louisiana Territory, stretching from the Mississippi River to the Rocky Mountains. The land had passed from French to Spanish rule in 1762, then back to France in 1800, before being acquired by the United States through the Louisiana Purchase in 1803. The twisting Arkansas River served as a key artery for explorers and traders, pushing westward through this immense landscape. It was during Spanish rule in 1797 that a group of 12 men made their way down the Arkansas River, transporting a large cache of gold. It was late October, and the surrounding hills were ablaze with autumn colors. Their destination was present-day Fort Smith, where a river crossing known as the Narrows would provide access to relative safety on the south bank of the Arkansas River. Only 40 more miles, and their journey would be complete. But they were not alone. A roving band of Arapaho had picked up their trail and was following them. Heavily outnumbered, the Spaniards made a desperate decision to slip away under the cover of darkness. Veering off course, they traveled eastward, some 25 miles away from the river trail, venturing into what the locals now call the mountains. In reality, these were not true mountains, but a rugged expanse of densely wooded, brush-covered hills stretching into what is now Arkansas. At the time, the area was untouched wilderness, with no roads, only faint animal tracks and Indian paths. About 7 miles west of what is now the Oklahoma-Arkansas border, they came across a narrow trail, still partially visible today. The path followed the banks of a small stream, later named Lee's Creek. As they reached a bend in the creek where the trail rose steeply, the Arapaho attacked. The Spaniards had only one advantage. The terrain allowed the enemy to strike from only 2 sides. They dug in as best they could, fighting for their lives. In the chaos, they hastily dumped their gold into a small slough nearby. One of the men, thinking quickly, drilled 2 holes into the underside of a large, sharply leaning white oak tree. The tree pointed directly toward the submerged treasure. He then plugged the holes with wooden pegs, trimming them flush with the bark so they would eventually heal over, rendering them invisible. But their efforts were in vain. The battle's outcome was inevitable. With the gold hidden, the surviving Spaniards mounted their exhausted horses and tried to flee. How many actually escaped remains a mystery, but what is certain is that at least one man survived and eventually made it to New Orleans. I first heard this tale in 1956, passed down by an uncle of mine, a half-blood Cherokee. At the time, it was little more than a vague legend, an old story whispered through generations. There wasn't enough detail to justify a serious search for the treasure, but the possibility lingered in my mind. Years later, while conducting unrelated research in the archives of Santa Fe, I stumbled upon fragments of historical records that hinted at Spanish incursions into Oklahoma. I found mention of a Spanish mission established in the Wichita Mountains as early as 1621, as well as references to a trail leading from there to the general area where the treasure was said to be buried. There were also records of at least 2 Spanish expeditions traveling along the Arkansas River. It wasn't much, but it was enough to suggest that the story had a foundation in historical fact. Further evidence appeared in Oklahoma, a guide to the Sooner State by Ruth and others. A map within the book marked an old trail leading to Fort Smith and the Narrows. Given its location, it's entirely possible that this trail was already ancient by the time the 5 civilized tribes arrived in Oklahoma. In at least one section, the path came within 10 miles of the rumored treasure site. Could the Spanish gold still lie hidden beneath the waters of Lee's Creek, waiting to be discovered? With a few corroborating facts finally in hand, I decided it was time to make a trip into the area in search of more information. In 1963, I embarked on my first journey into the heart of the Cherokee Nation, traveling to Tahlequah, the Cherokee capital, established in 1839. I spent 5 days there speaking with locals and searching for anyone who might have heard of the story. Eventually, I met an old man named Ross. He had heard of the tale but knew little beyond its existence. However, he provided me with 2 important names, Jumper and Little Lee's Creek. Hoping for more leads, I continued to Salisaw, but the results were no better. The only information I could gather was a set of directions to where the creek crossed the road near Neah-kah-nie, a small hamlet with a population that was about half Cherokee. Once there, I learned that a family named Jumper had lived along Lee's Creek for many years. Unfortunately, they were either long deceased or had moved away. Determined, I made my way to Lee's Creek about 4 miles north of Neah-kah-nie. I pulled off onto an old road that veered right along the south bank and began searching the area, covering more than 2 miles on either side. I found no obvious markings or signs of treasure. A metal detector sweep turned up only a rusty old spur, missing its rowel, and a discarded tobacco can. However, I did discover 2 sloughs bordering the creek and evidence of extensive timber cutting from years past. Back in Neah-kah-nie, after hours of conversation with the locals, I learned that a white family had lived along the creek in the 1920s, working in timber cutting and sawmilling. A man named Rooker Holloman and his son Bill Holloman had cut railroad ties there. I was told that Bill had long since moved to Chama, New Mexico. Determined to track him down, I traveled to Chama, where I confirmed that Bill Holloman had indeed lived there and worked in the timber industry. However, he had since left the area. It would take me 5 years to find him, but eventually I did. And when I did, he confirmed that he knew about the lost gold, down to the finest details. According to Holloman, in 1927, an elderly Cherokee named Jack Jumper had grown close to his father, Rooker Holloman, and had shared an intriguing story. Jack's own father, John Jumper, had been part of a group of Cherokee men who helped a mysterious white man attempt to drain the slough on Lee's Creek during the Civil War era. This white man had traveled into Cherokee Nation from New Orleans, claiming that his father had once marked the location of buried treasure. The man's father, he explained, had been among the Spaniards who were attacked by the Arapaho. He had survived, escaping to New Orleans, and had passed down the knowledge of the hidden gold. Now, the son had returned, hoping to recover it. He offered to share the treasure with the Cherokee if they would help him. But fear intervened. The Cherokee, much like the Irish, believed in supernatural little people, spirits that had followed them over the infamous Trail of Tears from Georgia and Tennessee in 1839. These spirits, they believed, guarded the rivers and streams, and disturbing them could bring disaster. When 2 of the Cherokee men involved in the project died suddenly, the others refused to continue. Fearful of angering the spirits, they abandoned the effort entirely. The white man from New Orleans was left with no choice but to seek out other allies. He approached the Jumper and Eagle families, telling them the full story of the buried gold. But they too refused to help and ultimately ran him out of the Cherokee Nation. Years later, in 1935, Rooker Holloman was cutting timber along Lee's Creek when he felled a massive white oak tree. As soon as he made the first cut, he noticed something unusual. 2 holes bored into the underside of the trunk, their wooden pegs still intact. Recognizing this as an old marking technique, he called his son Bill over and asked if he remembered the story of the lost gold. They searched the immediate area half-heartedly, but the old Indians' warning that the gold was buried in water and mud deterred them from looking too hard. Times were tough during the Great Depression, and their priority was making a living, not chasing treasure. So, like so many before them, they left the mystery unsolved. When I asked Bill Holloman if he could still locate the spot where the tree once stood, he confidently assured me that he could. So together, we traveled to Oklahoma and made our way back to Lee's Creek. But when we arrived, we were faced with a harsh reality. Decades of flooding had completely altered the landscape. The landmarks Bill remembered were gone. The tree was long since cut, the sloughs had shifted, and whatever secrets the land had once held seemed to have been washed away with time. Still, I couldn't help but wonder, Was the lost Spanish gold still hidden beneath the waters of Lee's Creek, waiting for someone to uncover it? The creek had changed its course over the years, creating not one but two sloughs, with an island now sitting in the middle. Bill Holloman could no longer locate the stump of the old white oak tree. It had either rotted away or been carried off by floodwaters. All he could do was estimate that it had once stood within a quarter-mile radius, less than a mile from the crossing. Some areas of the creek bed had been swept clean, while others had accumulated deep layers of topsoil from past floods. We had only one day to search on that trip, and despite our efforts, we found nothing. 3 months later, we returned for a more thorough 2-day search, but again, we came up empty-handed. At the time, I was using a beat-frequency metal detector with a 12-inch loop. We quickly realized that a square-loop instrument would likely yield better results. For our next trip, Bill and I planned to use this improved equipment. One thing I knew for sure, Bill Holloman was an honest man with an incredible memory. He firmly believed that the old Cherokee, Jack Jumper, had told the truth about the treasure. And if Bill really did cut down a tree marked by the Spaniards, which I fully believe he did, then this adds even more credibility to the legend of the Lee's Creek treasure. Of course, it's possible that the white man, who originally sought the gold, returned after the Civil War and recovered it. But that seems unlikely, especially considering how closely the Cherokee watched everything that happened in their land. If someone had disturbed the site, they would have known. For those interested in searching for the treasure today, Neah-kah-nie can be easily found on road maps. Only one road heads north from the town. About 4 miles along this road, a crossing over Lee's Creek can be found. The creek flows over a rocky bed, and the sloughs lie downstream, less than a mile away. Fortunately, the people in this area tend to mind their own business. No one will bother a treasure hunter here. Somewhere along the north bank of the slough, on the island between the two branches of the creek, or perhaps buried beneath 2 feet of mud and water downstream, lie 7 jackloads of Spanish gold. On our last trip, Bill and I spoke with an elderly Cherokee man who had lived in the area for many years. When we told him our purpose, he confirmed that he was familiar with the legend and believed it to be true. He also shared another intriguing tale. According to Cherokee oral tradition, about 3 miles upstream from where we were searching, another creek joins Lee's Creek. It was there long ago that a band of Arapaho ambushed a group of French traders returning to New Orleans. After killing them all, the warriors supposedly hid their spoils in a cave, carefully concealing the entrance. If Bill and I return, we will search for this cave as well. This is the story as I know it, and I am inclined to believe that it is true. Somewhere along the banks of this stream, deep in eastern Oklahoma, Spanish gold may still be waiting for the person who can solve the mystery. The only thing that might prevent its recovery is if the gold was once stored in leather bags. If that's the case, it's possible that the bags have long since rotted away, allowing the gold to scatter downstream, forming what could be the richest placer deposit in Oklahoma's history. Regardless of the treasure, exploring this historic land is a pleasure in itself. In the autumn, when the hardwood trees explode in brilliant colors, it becomes even more breathtaking. And for anyone fascinated by the history of the Cherokee Nation, it holds an even deeper appeal. One thing I am fairly certain of, at least as certain as one can be in matters of lost treasure, I am the first to search for this cache since the 1860s. That alone increases the odds that the gold is still out there. So, good luck. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to read the original article or purchase the magazine from which it was taken, please check out our website, truetalesofburiedtreasure.com.